So today's video is going to focus on energy flow as it moves through ecosystems, in a typical pyramid food web food chain pattern, producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, etc., as well as how it gets into the food chain, how it's transferred, stored within the organism. So the first thing we're going to talk about is energy usage and body temperature. We talked about free energy in biochemistry. We touched on this a little bit. Okay, so remember that organisms need to use their energy to maintain organization. Okay, so to maintain cellular organization, to grow, and to reproduce. So different strategies are used dependent upon the type of organism to help it regulate its body temperature. That's the example we're going to focus on here. Body temperature and metabolism. Okay, so the first one is going to be an endotherm. And the second one here we'll talk about is an ectotherm. So an endotherm is going to use the thermal or the heat energy that is created by their own metabolism to maintain body temperature. Meaning, basically, the thermal or heat energy that's created when they do cellular respiration, or that's released when they do cellular respiration, is what is going to help maintain their body temperature. Where an ectotherm, remember, endo is inside, ecto is outside. An ectotherm can't do that. They don't have efficient inner mechanisms, so they use behavioral strategies and the environment to help maintain body temperature. They do things like move into the sun if they're too cold, or move out of the sun if they're too warm. Okay? They aggregate together, meaning they group or clump together so that they can help warm each other up. Okay? Both of these strategies are going to involve getting energy from an outside source, whether that's solar energy from the sun, energy being released from the surrounding organisms. Let's look at what this looks like in a graph here. Okay, so on the graphs over here on the right, we've got the ectotherm, which is some kind of lizard, alligator-looking thing, some kind of reptile. Okay, and on the y-axis here, we have oxygen consumption. So oxygen consumption is going to be related to cellular respiration, right? And then we have ambient temperature on the x-axis, meaning the temperature of the outside, okay? So the air temperature. So as the ambient temperature increases with the top one, with the reptile, right, with our ectotherm, as the ambient temperature increases, you'll notice that their rate of oxygen consumption starts to go up because they don't maintain a steady body temperature, right? So if the outside temperature is going up, then their body temperature is going up. And if their body temperature is going up, then their chemical reactions are going to happen a little bit faster, right? The enzymes, the molecules are moving a little bit faster, therefore cellular respiration will speed up a little bit. In the endotherm, down on the bottom, as the ambient temperature goes up, you'll notice that their rate of oxygen consumption actually goes down because they maintain their own body temperature. So they don't need to release as much heat to stay a constant temperature. They don't need to release as much heat to stay a constant temperature because the outside temperature is warm. So since their body temperature doesn't fluctuate with the outside temperature, their cellular respiration isn't automatically speeding up. Okay? And so they will start to slow down their cellular respiration because they don't want their body temperature to raise too high. Think about when it's really hot outside and you get kind of sluggish and slow, because you're slowing down your cellular respiration. Think about this mouse. As the ambient body temperature goes down with this mouse, as the ambient temperature goes down with this mouse, their oxygen consumption actually goes up because they're trying to stay warm. They're trying to maintain that certain temperature, right? We have the range that the temperature wants to be in, and they're going to try to maintain it. So as the outside temperature goes down, it gets really cold outside, 50s, 40s, 50s, 30s. We start to shiver, right? We start to breathe quicker because we're trying to do more cellular respiration to release more heat to keep our body temperature at a particular level. Where the ectotherm will just die. Its chemical reactions, its oxygen consumption will actually go down as the ambient temperature gets colder. Its oxygen consumption will go down because the chemical reactions slow down due to the temperature, and they could slow down enough where it dies. Reproductive strategies are also affected by energy. So different organisms are going to use different reproductive strategies due to resource and energy availability. So, for example, if we look at what we call seasonal breeding. So with seasonal breeding, you've got organisms that will only breed during certain times of year. And so they're only going to breed during those certain times of year because that's when the resources or the setting is good for the youth. Okay, I get optimal youth survival during certain times of year. So for instance, with the example we have here with the sheep breed during the fall, right? Because they have a 6-month gestational period, meaning that it takes 6 months for the baby to develop in the mother. So they breed or mate in the fall. You can see that happening here. They breed or mate in the fall so that the birth will occur in the spring. You'll see here in the 4th and 5th month when there's plenty of resource availability, plenty of food, plenty of water. Okay, you see with the example here, with the birds here, I believe that's a quail. Yeah, so with the quail, okay, they don't even breed until the spring. Okay, so that because their gestational period is much shorter. Okay, and so again, you have mating, egg laying, incubation. The offspring are growing also during the summer, but they don't want to breed as early as the sheep did, because then the chicks would hatch too early and there wouldn't be good food and water availability. The animals know when to breed, okay, based upon the length of the day. You see on the graph here, it talks about the sheep being a short day breeder and the quail being a long day breeder. Okay, in winter and in fall, the length of the day becomes shorter, and so the sheep knows that it's time to breed. And in the summer and spring, the length of the day becomes longer, and so the quail is considered a long day breeder. So our metabolic rate is our amount of energy used by the animal per unit of time. So this will include both anabolic reactions, remember reactions that are going to build things up, as well as catabolic reactions, those reactions that will break things back down. So your metabolic rate is going to be a combination of those two reactions. Okay? It's generally smaller animals have a higher metabolic rate. So generally smaller multicellular animals in particular, I'm not talking about like paramecium here. Generally smaller multicellular animals have a higher metabolic rate. They have a higher surface area to volume ratio. Remember we looked at this with cells? Okay, so they have a higher surface area to volume ratio, so they lose more heat. Therefore, they need to do cellular respiration faster. They need a higher oxygen delivery to replace that heat that's lost, in particular your endotherms too. All right, so since they have that higher surface area to volume ratio and they lose more heat, they're going to be doing more cellular respiration, so they have this higher metabolic rate. A overall net gain in energy is going to result in growth. You're going to have energy storage or growth of the organism. For example, in humans, this is how we gain weight. We reach a point where we don't really grow any taller. So if we have a net gain of energy, so we're taking in more energy than we are releasing, that's going to result in us storing energy in fat cells and growing larger that way, getting wider. A net loss of energy is going to result in a loss of mass and can result in the eventual death of the organism if that trend continues. So again, with our example of humans, this would be losing weight. I have to burn more calories or use more calories, which are a form of measurement of energy, right? So I have to use more energy than I take in to be able to lose mass. If we look at our graph down at the bottom here, we can see our total metabolic rate over here on the y-axis versus body mass there on the x-axis. And you'll see, for instance, that smaller mouse there has a total metabolic rate relative to its size, which is actually going to be much faster than the elephants. Okay, so looking at the population in the ecosystem, this is freshman year review, right? Our changes in energy availability, they can affect the population and they can affect the ecosystem. For instance, if we have a major change in the amount of sunlight, right, that could affect, or the availability of water, that could affect our producer level. And so now that starts that trickle up effect, and it affects the primary consumers, which will then affect the secondary consumers. Right? Remember, our food chains and our food webs are going to help us model energy flow. Okay? So if you see that word model, okay, you need to be thinking food web, food chain. That's going to help show us that. Okay? Just a quick review on this. Remember, the energy, the arrows show the flow of energy going into the mouth of the consumer. For example, the lizard goes into the hawk, right? So the energy goes from the lizard to the hawk. Right? Remember, we have producers, primary consumers, primary consumers eating our producers, secondary consumers eating those primary consumers, and then you have your tertiary consumers. Again, the hope is that you remember this from both middle school and freshman year, as well as that vocabulary like a carnivore eating only meat, omnivores eating both meat and producers, herbivore eating only plants. Okay, and so you're gonna be asked occasionally to manipulate a food web, or potentially be given a diagram of one and asked to draw arrows or put the organisms in the correct place. So looking at our autotrophs here, our autotrophs capture energy from physical and chemical sources in the environment. So we have two basic types of autotroph. We have photosynthetic organisms, okay, which are going to capture energy from sunlight. Remember, photo is light. And we have chemosynthetic organisms, chemosynthetic autotrophs, which are going to capture energy from small organic molecules. So basically from chemicals, hence the chemosynthetic. So they'll break down these organic molecules and release the energy. This does not require any oxygen, so chemosynthetic organisms can work in those anaerobic type of environments, like, for example, anaerobic bacteria down at the hydrothermal vent. Okay? What these autotrophs or these producers are going to do is they're going to allow for that energy flow in the ecosystem. They're going to be the ones pulling the energy into the ecosystem in the first place. So when that producer population becomes affected, that has a huge impact overall on the ecosystem. Remember, your heterotrophs, these are going to be organisms that are going to capture energy present in carbon compounds produced by other organisms. So those carbon compounds, like for instance glucose, produced by the autotrophs. Okay? They can metabolize carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, all as energy sources. They'll metabolize them, usually doing hydrolysis, right, using water to break those down, and they'll release the nutrients from there. For instance, think about when we eat, right? We're a heterotroph, okay, and we say that we need protein. Well, and so we eat a steak for protein, or we eat a piece of chicken for protein. Okay? We don't need chicken protein. What we need are the amino acids that the chicken protein is made up of, so that we can make our own human proteins. So we eat the bite of chicken, we digest and break that piece of chicken down, that protein, into its amino acids, and then our body takes those individual amino acids and reassembles them into human proteins, not chicken proteins. And we can do that with carbohydrates and lipids as well. Okay, and so the heterotrophs are really what are going to be moving the energy from level to level in the ecosystem. So the autotrophs will bring the energy into the ecosystem, where the heterotrophs will help to move it. Okay, remember, you have your approximate 10% rule. Okay, do not get so focused on this 10% rule that you can't function anymore. Right? If it gives you an actual number and then changes that 10% rule, or it gives you a number, let's say it gives you 1,000, joules and it says 600 joules, move to the next level, then you work with that. Okay, remember our 10% rule is a general rule of thumb. Okay, but that's about how much energy is moved from level to level in the ecosystem. Okay, and you can see over here, right, that some of it's going to be lost due to heat, right? When we do those chemical reactions, we lose energy as heat. They're not all 100% efficient. Okay, so a lot of that energy is lost as respiration and heat. Some of that eventual energy ends up at the decomposers, right? Our decomposers are going to be who are releasing the carbon compounds from those original autotrophs, so trapped in the heterotrophs, and so that the autotrophs can bring it back into the system. So the decomposers are going to, when these organisms die, whether it's an autotroph or a heterotroph, they're going to break them down, release the carbon, and now the autotrophs can bring that carbon back into the ecosystem. So it continually will cycle through. Okay, so we'll look at some practice with these. Hopefully we'll get to do some FRQs with them. Okay, and hopefully you remember some of this energy flow stuff from your freshman year.